Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Wars Clone Wars Season 2. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every single Saturday episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars, one season at a time. In this video I will cover Season 2 of The Clone Wars. So, as if you watched my Season 1 video, you may know that I am watching the show for the first time, so I have not seen the show before. Season 1 I kind of thought was really average, and I thought maybe if I wasn't watching the show because for these videos, or if it didn't have the word Star Wars attached, I would have given up on the show. Not that it was bad, but it wasn't really particularly good either. However, I did enjoy Season 2 more than Season 1. It still is, I would still describe it as mostly like good, like averagely good. But nothing like that completely blew me away or had me like saying, oh wow, this show's amazing or anything like that. But it was definitely an improvement on Season 1. I think it got less mediocre, if I should say. And it didn't have as many episodes that bothered me as much as the first season did. And it's, it stuck with the format of having like trilogies of episodes. And there were some standalone episodes as well, but there was a lot of like three-parters, which I think is a pretty interesting format. And I found the three-parters in this season more interesting. Like, they grabbed me more. I talked about in my Season 1 review how there was a bit of apathy or a bit of a disconnect about like storylines about, we gotta, about the war where we have to defend this planet, or we have to overtake this planet, or we have to defeat this general, because I really don't care about that kind of thing if that's the main focus, the main thrust of the story, because I know how the war ends. I've seen Revenge of the Sith, and I know that the war is actually kind of pointless and just a plot, just a distraction for Palpatine to take control over the Republic and turn it into an empire. And so, knowing that, knowing like which battle is won in the war, or which planet is seized or whatever, it really doesn't. Really seems meaningless to me. I really have a hard time of caring one way or another. And I think Season 1 focused too much on that, whereas Season 2 didn't. They found other things. There were still battles and there's still a war going on. They're still trying to liberate planets or whatever, but that wasn't the focus. I found that they've found ways to focus on other things more, like the characters or some of the other specific worlds that are involved in situations that are affected by the war. And that makes it a lot more interesting to me. I think there was one trilogy of episodes in here that did, I think, focus too much on, the strategic importance of the war. So that one I didn't care about, but it was just the one trilogy, basically, where I felt like most of Season 1 was like that, where Season 2, I think, had a more character-focused, and also focused more on Darth Sidious and Palpatine, and how they're using their plot to slowly corrupt the Republic. And so that's interesting, because even though I know he does it, it is interesting to see how, and it is interesting to see seeds of that in there without being too obvious, where I think a couple episodes in Season 1 I was like, Palpatine was being way too obvious that clearly he's evil. Where here I think they did a better job of hinting at it, but without making it too obvious, and making it really subtle. And it also developed characters more like Ahsoka Tano, which I'm sorry, it doesn't matter because I've heard a lot of reasonings, but it doesn't matter what anyone tells me or what I read, it still seems ridiculous to me that Anakin has a Padawan when Anakin himself is not really a master, which is made clear in Revenge of the Sith. It's like, And Revenge of the Sith, when they had the scene where Anakin gets all pissed off at the Jedi Council for not making him a master, I want to say, hey, Anakin, don't be upset because you have a Padawan, so you actually are a master. Anyway, I know people will have excuses for that, but doesn't matter what anyone tells me. This will irk me to my dying day about this show, but I'm sure the more I watch this show, the more I'll be able to forget it and set it aside, because I'm already starting to set it aside a bit more during season 2, but I will never forgive it, and it will always bother me. Anyway, and it doesn't matter. I've heard specific excuses for it, and it still seems really just afterthoughts to try to justify why this doesn't fit in. And from what I hear about season 7 of the Clone Wars, that there's a lot of doesn't fit into Revenge of the Sith perfectly either. So it looks like I'll have other things to nitpick about. But anyway, overall, I did enjoy the season a lot more. I think the show does have some improving to do, and from what I hear, it will. So I'm a bit more enthusiastic and a bit more interested going forward to watch more of the show. So let's go ahead and get into the episodes of Season 2. So we'll start with the first episode, a Holocron Heist. Now this season opens up with a 3-parter, as I said, which is common in the season. So the first part of this deals with that same bounty hunter we saw at the Season 1 finale, and he's hired by Darth Sidious to retrieve this holocron from the Jedi Council. Now, at first, I'm very iffy on this bounty hunter guy, because he was basically a Mary Sue in the finale. Like, he was too unstoppable when he shouldn't have been. It should have been actually fairly easy to stop him. Like, at that finale kind of pissed me off that he did it. He robbed this place in broad daylight and nobody fucking noticed. No alarm systems. I'm sorry, I can't get over that. So it's hard for me to get into this guy because I'm already don't like him because I see him as a Mary Sue character. And I think this 3-parter sort of made me feel a bit better about him. Now, in this first part, he was also seen as kind of unstoppable, but in a more sort of realistic way, not in a way that makes no sense and was so contrived for the plot. In this manner, it was actually... So I actually really liked this 3-parter, to be clear, and I actually really liked this premiere episode because Obi-Wan and Anakin, like, Yoda could like sense that someone was trying to break into the Jedi Council, but that's all it was. Like, it was a vague like sense of it. They had no idea exactly what he was going for, and in fact they kept thinking, well, what could they possibly want from the Jedi Council? Well, it must be communications. It must be looking for a strategical plan, so they're going to communications room, and it turned out that wasn't the case at all. I think the fact that even after he stole the holocron, they're like, what the hell would he want with that? Because he can't even operate that without it. They need another piece, and the Jedi needs to work it. But of course, he had a plan in motion for that. So I really liked this episode. I liked the fact that that everyone was thrown off and looking for them in the wrong place, which is part of the reason why I could buy his heist would work. And also Ahsoka, I love the fact that she got caught on to his, the person he was working with, who was, disguised, I guess a changeling is what they call it. It's not the kind from Deep Space Nine, but the kind from Clone Wars, and she was disguised as the librarian, and Ahsoka saw through it and figured out and was managed to thwart part of their plan. But they still got away with the holocron. So I like that aspect of it. It sort of got into her character more, and it was an exciting episode, so I really liked it. So then we get into the second part, Cargo of Doom. This one, I didn't like quite as much, because then the bounty hunter guy did come off a bit as a Mary Sue. Nowhere near as bad as the first season, but still he was winning at every chance. Like, Jedi were pursuing him, but he purposely wanted his ship to be boarded by the Jedi so he could trap them and use them to open the thing, and that's exactly what he did. He trapped Ahsoka, and then Anakin came after her just as he was hoping that he would, and he used, threatened to kill her in order to use Anakin to open the holocron because, you needed a Jedi in order to operate it, and he managed to do that. That aspect of it, he wins again. Is this guy freaking unstoppable? But he didn't completely win because his plan was to kill Ahsoka and Anakin, and that didn't work. They obviously are the main characters, so they survived. So at least he's not infallible, but he did get away with the holocron and delivered it to Darth Sidious. So yeah, I still like this episode. It still kept up with the same tension. It was just maybe didn't like it quite as much because, again, this dude always has to win. So then we get into the third episode, Children of the Force, which I liked a lot better because he lost, finally. He can be defeated. He's not a Mary Sue. Although he still tried to get the better of the Jedi, even though he got captured. And he does end up escaping and getting away at the end, but I'm okay with that because we need the villain out on the run so they can reappear, like any good cartoon or comic book will do. But he didn't win. The Jedi actually defeated him, even though he got away with his life. His whole plan, he was hired by Darth Sidious then because the holocron basically gave the locations of all the potential young Jedis out there so that Darth Sidious could corrupt them. And so he was hired to kidnap them. And I love how he was like, so you want to hire me to kidnap defenseless young children? You have to pay me a bit more. They really get into the fact that this guy has no scruples. But whatever. Anyway, so he fails. They actually managed, when he tries to capture a Gungan, whatever they're called, Jar Jar species. It's funny that there's a Gungan that's actually going to be a Jedi. That's a hilarious concept in and of itself. Anywho, when he goes to capture him, they manage to thwart him, and then they manage to track him down, and they capture him. They try to use him to, see where the young ones are already, the ones that have already been kidnapped, where they're being held, and he does take them to him, but he sets a trap and manages to get it away, but they manage to recover the younglings. So again, a really exciting episode. I like this one a lot better, probably the best out of the three because he finally gets defeated. He's not invincible after all. Anyway, we then get into the next episode, which is called Senate Spy. This had to do with Padme and her ex-lover, and she's sent on the mission to, because apparently her ex-lover is a spy and working with the Separatists, so she's sent on the mission to find them out, and Anakin's all jealous, and he comes along with her, so this episode is kind of it wasn't terrible, it was somewhat interesting, but of course the Padme Anakin relationship is nothing that I'm too excited about. And and it was kind of cheesy, and the guy was kind of corny, and he actually but I love you, Padme, you betrayed me, blah blah. So it was very cliche by the numbers and stuff we've seen dozens of times before, so I wasn't too impressed with this one either. So next episode is called Landing at Point Rain, and this gets into a new trilogy. It's the one that I referenced at the start of my video about the trilogy that seemed like a throwback to season 1, where it was about, let's defeat this strategic point or conquer this planet or retake this planet in the war, which I don't care about because I know how the war ends, and I know that the war was pretty pointless. It was just there, as a distraction for Palpatine to take over. So what do I care if they conquer? In this case, it's Geonosis. It's the planet that appeared in Attack of the Clones. And apparently, in this episode, they reveal that the Republic conquered this planet like 2 or 3 times, but got repelled each time, so they're trying to retake it. And, that deals with, was this other Jedi, this weird-looking dude who was in the prequels, Kai Amidamundi, or whatever his name. They go to... I actually fell asleep during this episode. I thought it was by the numbers, pew, pew, poo, poo, pew, pow, 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 war episode with nothing really, interesting about it. So, it was kind of bland for me. Anyway, we'll get into the next episode in the trilogy, which is Weapons Factory, and this one was a little bit more interesting than the first one because it had gotten into more character stuff with Ahsoka Tano teaming up with another Padawan, and it had like this Padawan team, which we'll see in a couple times in the next several episodes. But this is when they first kind of team up, I mean, honestly, I don't remember much from this episode. But I remember it was fine. I remember it was more interesting than the previous one because it had more character beats rather than just a pew pew pow pow, but still not all that great. Next episode is Legacy of Terror. Now that I remember very clearly because this is the one where so they conquered all these, specific locations of Geonosis. They pretty much conquered Geonosis, but that, funny-looking dude who's in Attack of the Clones who goes... that could actually describe a couple dozen Star Wars characters, but anyway... If you've seen the episode, you know which one I'm talking about. So they need to capture him, and he goes on the run. And he runs this underground palace, and apparently there's these evil Geonosians or like these insect creatures, and it has the queen that controls them, and apparently they're zombie creatures because they keep fighting even after they die. And so they play it as a horror thing because the clone troopers kept getting eaten up or killed by them. And I don't know, the horror aspect of it, of course, I wasn't a huge fan of. But I kind of did like how Obi-Wan and Anakin were kind of out of their depth, and they came up with a strategy to try to defeat this queen and capture the dude and get out of there. So it was a fairly, it was pretty tense episode. So it was a fairly engaging episode. So it was pretty decent. So the next episode after that is called Brain Invaders because the previous episode had these the insect creatures had these weird. Little worm thing is kind of like the Goa'uld from Stargate SG-1 that can infest people and turn them evil, or basically make them a servant of the queen, the Geonosian queen or whatever. And ended with the dun 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 cliffhanger where one of the clone troopers was infected. And in fact, because at the end of the previous episode, the clone returned and nobody was the wiser. But at the start of this episode, they start to notice how come this guy's not answering me or whatever. But anyway, he still gets away and he gets in the same ship that Ahsoka Tano and that other Padawan go on the mission, just a standard supply run. But it turns out that it gets these things end up taking over, and they end up taking over most of the clone troopers there, and so they all become evil and they all turn against them. This is very intense, especially how Ahsoka and the other one didn't really know what was going on. It made no sense why the clones were suddenly attacking them, and it suddenly got revealed. But where this episode kind of lost me is when the other Jedi, the Padawan, the other one who's not Ahsoka, she got taken over. But it seemed like she shouldn't have, because especially the way that Ahsoka and her like fought them off. They were able to use like their force powers or whatnot to break them. And it seems like when they had like cornered her and that worm thing was going to go in there, that she could have just like forced, used the force to like throw her to the other side of the room, or used the force to like throw all of the clones off of her and then just run and escape. But instead, she just sat there and went, "No!" Which I thought, no, that's not realistic. This is just plot contrivance because they wanted her to be infected so that they could have a fight between her and Ahsoka, which they did, and I couldn't enjoy it because it was really contrived in order to get to this point. And I was like, yes, you're contriving this fight. Good for you. Good for you! So I didn't really enjoy the end of it that much. But it was still an intense episode, especially when Ahsoka was on her own, having to fight off an entire ship of infected people, and they were at risk of destroying the other ship, and they managed to win. So it was kind of tense at the end. So I still liked this episode a lot. It's just that one plot point really bugged me. Anywho, let's get into the next episode, which is called Grievous Intrigue, which of course deals with General Grievous. Oh, for joy for Joey. I never really liked General Grievous, but I understand why the show would keep going back to him, because he's an established villain in the prequel timeline. But I always thought he was kind of just there to be hoo-hoo-hoo, ha-ha, bad guy, and I never really understood him or got into him. Anyway, in this case, this Jedi tries to track him down, and Grievous ends up capturing him, and he ends up just killing him outright, or torturing him. It was a really dark episode because he basically tortured this Jedi to death. And when Obi-Wan, Anakin, and a couple other Jedi show up, Grievous is able to sort of predict their next moves and tries to and he's just like, I'm going to kill you all, blah, blah, blah. And as you would expect, he doesn't, of course, kill the Jedis because we know they're still alive later. And he gets away because we know that he's still at large later. So, yeah. It was alright, I guess. So the next episode is called The Deserter. Now, this episode I really appreciated more. Now, this is actually kind of the second part of the previous episode, because they're still dealing with General Grievous. He crashes on this planet, and they go after him. They try to capture him. But that's really like the subplot, which was kind of okay, whatever. But I really liked this episode because the main plot focused on Rex, the clone trooper, finding this like farmhouse and needing to rest, like he get injured, so all the clones brought him there, like he needs to rest. And there's his mother with these two little kids, and one of the little kids like, "Oh, you look like my daddy," which is like, that's really interesting. That's a weird thing. And it was like a different kind of alien, and she was saying that this clone looks like her daddy, and I was like, that's a strange thing to say. But you find out that her father is in fact one of the clones. And hence the name of the episode, The Deserter, because Rex is like, "Oh, you're a deserter," and he's like, "Well, I got better things to do than fight in the war. I don't care if I was cloned or made to fight in the war. I want to live it." And this, I feel like this is going to be a theme that's going to be explored a lot more in the show, how the clones aren't really all the same, and there's a lot of differences between them and whatnot. And so I thought this was a really interesting way to get into it, and it was a really interesting concept of having this clone who decided to go against his programming, basically, and to be a good father. And I thought Rex had an interesting character journey in this episode too, where he at first was like, "Oh, you're a deserter," but then he managed to see the value in it, and basically became good friends with this guy. And then when the guy was like, "Oh, you could stay here with me," and Rex is like, "No, this is your life. This is what is good for you. For me, I got to return to my life." which was a nice ending. So he's like, look, if you don't want to fight in a war, have a family, go for it. But I do want to fight in a war because that is my family. So it was, I think it was a really touching character story. So I actually really liked this one. Anyway, we'll get into the next episode, which is called Lightsaber Lost. This is when Ahsoka Tano loses her lightsaber. And it's the weird name for the episode. Anyway, I don't know about this one. Like, I didn't totally hate it. It was fine, I guess. It was just silly. It was like, and plus, like, it seemed like Ahsoka, using her force powers or whatever, should have never lost it in the first place. But then, this episode couldn't happen if she didn't lose it. So, contrivance, she has to lose it. And then it meets up with this old dude who's supposed to be an expert on, the criminal underworld, which, I don't know, it just seemed weird that this old dude was an expert on it. Anyway, they end up, they go from place to place trying to find the lightsaber, and they track it down to these two women who murder this drug or gang leader or whatever in order to get the lightsaber. And so they try, and Ahsoka's chasing one of them, but the old dude manages to figure out this one witness was actually in on it with her, and he slowly tracks her down by crawling and doing his old man walk. It was, and just show up at the last minute to stop them. And that was kind of interesting. I did like that. But overall, I wasn't too crazy about this episode. It was just okay. Alright, so then we get into the next trilogy, which is called the Mandalore Plot. This is where I suppose we're introduced to the Mandalorians. Now, I'm going to refrain from talking about how this relates to the show The Mandalorian because I haven't seen all of Clone Wars yet. And it's obvious that more about Mandalore is going to be revealed that's going to be relevant to it, so I don't really know what's going on yet, so I'm not going to comment on that aspect on it and just talk about the episode. The first part, they meet the Duchess Centaur of Mandalore, and she once had a fling with Obi-Wan, and she's very adamant. She's like a staunch pacifist and very adamant that the Mandalore remain neutral to the war, and he had this kind of love-hate relationship with Obi-Wan and whatnot. And this first episode I thought was kind of boring. To be honest, it wasn't terrible, but it was okay. Next episode in this trilogy, Voyage of Temptation, got a little bit more interesting. It did feature the Duchess traveling off to the Senate, and on the way, and there was a bunch of senators on board, and on the way, there's a traitor amongst them. Dun dun dun. They had these weird spider-shaped assassin droids, what they call them, but it's basically the thing from the Matrix. It's the Sentinels from the Matrix. As soon as it popped up, I'm like, oh my god, it's the thing from the Matrix. Watch out, get Neo. It's totally the thing from the Matrix. Anyway, but they were scary looking, and I did think it was pretty intense. And I gotta admit, I enjoyed the relationship between the Duchess and Obi-Wan a little bit more in this episode, even though it got ridiculous where they revealed that they loved each other at the end. I'm like, who cares? Come on. Anywho, but it's an interesting concept that Anakin isn't the only Jedi who fell in love, that, even though Jedis aren't supposed to, that Obi-Wan himself sort of indulged once, but he kind of is trying to reject it. Yeah, interesting concept. Anyway, we've finished the trilogy out with the Duchess of Mandalore, and I think this is my favorite of the three. This is where she does travel to Coruscant and try to, insist that the Mandalorians, or Mandalore, it's hard to see, but insist that Mandalore stay neutral. And apparently there's this fake recording that from someone from Mandalore saying that they're going to be overrun and they need Republic help. So Palpatine's like, oh well, fuck you, we're going to send Republic help anyway. This seems like a messed up legal system. Like, it seems like if a country or a nation specifically says, like, the leader of the nation standing right in front of you and says, do not come to our system. And the Senate's like, well, we voted in the Senate that we're going to do it, so fuck you. We're going to come to your system and help you anyway. That does seem pretty fucked up. And this episode in particular, Palpatine seemed kind of obvious of being the villain here, but not too obvious. Not so much as like in some season 1 episodes where it's like, come on, guys. Clearly he's the villain. Here, it wasn't as obvious, but it was good. Like, I liked it. And then, of course, she, there's assassins out trying to kill her, and she got framed for one of the murders, and she was on the run. So that part of it I found really intense, and then Obi-Wan sort of teaming up with her, too. It was a really intense episode, and you really thought that she didn't have a chance, so when Obi-Wan ends up, like, helping her, it was a really satisfying ending. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. Next episode is Senate Murders, and this is, I really didn't like this one. I found this one boring. It's a very cliche murder mystery. Oh, who did it? Where there's, another, and it is an episode that focused entirely on, like, the senators, what's her face? Padme, let's say it that way, and Senator Organa and all of them, and didn't have any Anakin or any Jedis in it, which is an interesting turn, but I thought the episode was boring as fuck. It was a very cliche murder mystery where it's like, oh, who done it? Is this a suspect? Oh, and they go meet these people, who are a very likely suspect, so you know that they didn't do it. In fact, this other person who is like the aide or whatever, I thought it was pretty obvious she did it, and of course when they find it out, she's like, oh, I did it and I do it again. It was so cliche, Perry Mason-ass bullshit. Not the worst thing ever, but I didn't really care for it that much. Anywho, we get into the next episode, which is called Cat and Mouse. That's what I say about this episode. I thought it was dumb. It dealt with this spider dude who apparently was this evil, what do they call him? Admiral Trench, who's supposed to, like, be dead and possible. And so when that Admiral guy finds out, it's like, oh, I faced him before, and he insists on going with Anakin, and they fly this stealth ship to try to break his blockade, but Anakin uses it to, like, destroy his ship instead. I mean, whatever. Whatever. I didn't hate it, but whatever. Anyway, next episode is called Bounty Hunters. So, at the start of this episode, there was in loving memory of, God, I'm gonna mispronounce his name. I feel so terrible about it. Maybe I'm just not going to pronounce his name. But it's a director who directed Seven Samurais, and amongst other classic samurai films. He's a really well-known director, and it said in loving memory of him. And I was like, that's a weird thing to put at the start of a Clone Wars episode. Maybe this does it, because I'm not familiar when he passed away. So I was like, maybe he just passed away recently, and they just thought they should mention it. But then, as I started watching the episode, I realized why I was there, because this was just another fucking ripoff of the Seven Samurai or the Magnificent Seven or whatever, where they do the same plot over and 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 over again. Now, I've seen this exact plot recycled so many times that I was just like, could not even be bothered with this episode that offered absolutely nothing new. Now, to be fair to this episode, it came out before some of the other ones I've seen, namely the 4 or 5 versions of this they had in The Mandalorian. Maybe it was more like 3 than 4 or 5, but it felt like that because they did it like so many times in The Mandalorian. I'm like, enough already, Jesus fucking Christ. How many times do you need to do this plot? So seeing The Mandalorian first probably made me less willing to see this again, because they had really did this to death. So to be fair, if I had seen this episode before The Mandalorian, I might not have hated it as much. But you know what? The thing it reminded me the most of was this Enterprise episode from Star Trek Enterprise, where they did the same plot, where these Klingons were terrorizing this group of miners, and Scott Bakula and his crew beamed down. Well, not beamed down, they shuttled down because they're too wimpy to use transporters. Anyway, they shuttled down and they helped them train to defeat the pirates, which is basically what they do in this episode, because they do, and in fact they use that stupid saying that pisses me the fuck off in Enterprise. At least they didn't use that saying here, where feed a man a fish and he eats for a day, teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime. That saying just pisses me off. But anyway, they didn't say it in this episode, but it basically implied the same exact thing, that they trained the farmers to fight off the bounty hunters themselves. Therefore, if they come back, because like, oh, we fight them all for you, then and they come back, then you'll be defenseless. But here's the thing, like in both this case and the Enterprise episode, they actively help defeat the pirates, even though they trained the farmers to do it. The farmers wouldn't be able to do it on their own. They wouldn't be able to get by without these experts' help. So therefore, it doesn't actually work that way. And it was just so fucking cliche. So the part of the episode where I groaned like hell is when, because they had Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka, but then they went there and there was like 4 bounty hunters that were hired by the farmers. So they made a point of pointing out, oh, there's 7 of you to defend us. 7! Oh, geez, I wonder where they came up with that fucking number. I'm just so sick of this fucking plot, seeing it recycled over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it was so cheesy at the end when the pirate's like, oh, you're not worth my time anymore, I'm just gonna go, which is fake! That's not how they would react. Also, this one I think was even worse than the Enterprise episode and the 6 times the Mandalorian did it, because the whole Obi-Wan offered him a perfectly legitimate deal at first. It's like, oh, well, we'll give you all this money that was more than what you would get if you robbed these farmers, if you just go away. And they're like, well, no, Republic credits are useless to us. Bullshit! That's a stupid excuse. That's a good deal! There's no reason why he shouldn't take this deal. He's being an asshole just for being an asshole, and then at the end he's like, oh, I got better things to do. Fuck this episode! I'm sorry. I shouldn't get so upset over a kid's show, but still. Get to the next episode. Which is called the Xylo Beast. So they go to this planet and to try to defeat the androids, and come up with this cool new weapon that can instantly destroy all the droids without harming any flesh or blood people or any equipment, which is an interesting concept. That would be an interesting battle tactic to go. But of course the weapon doesn't work as planned and has a side effect of creating all this massive sinkhole, and this unearths this great beast that the people who lived there thought was extinct, but apparently was just living on the ground because the weapon kind of fucked it up. This I kind of like, because it's a sort of ecological message about, messing with stuff, but then it turns into all the people want to kill the beast, and what's his face? Mace Windu is very insistent that they don't kill it, and so he comes up with this plan to stun it. And so, that's all well and good, but then Palpatine insists on taking it back to Coruscant against Mace Windu's, against his warnings. He's saying, no, don't do that, but Palpatine's like, fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway. Which leads us to the next episode, which I really didn't like. It's a sequel to this, the Xylo Beast Strikes Back. where it's brought to Coruscant, and I guess you'd never, ever in a billion years be able to guess what happens next. Really? I'll give you 3 guesses. I'll give you 1 guess. I'll give you 0 guess. It's fucking obvious! It breaks out and becomes like a Godzilla type thing with the monster going around Coruscant. Like the second they mentioned in the previous episode, Palpatine's, let's bring it to Coruscant. I'm like, oh, they're going to do a fucking Godzilla thing with this creature running around Coruscant. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. And you know what? The main reason why I don't like this episode is I don't really like how the Jedi behave in this episode. Because at first they were like, totally like, Palpatine was totally like, oh, let's just kill it. He was in this episode, he was completely acting like Darth Sidious. And maybe the Jedi weren't there for most of it, but still, it was obvious that he was being the villain. Even if they don't think he's, working with the Sith or anything like that, they still should have overruled him and be like, well, no, what you're doing here is wrong and we're going to stop you. And, you can come up with many in-universe excuses as to why they didn't do that, and some of them I would say are even valid, but still, it just bothered me that they didn't. It seemed like it would have been more in character for them to not listen to him, regardless of his position of power, because in many cases, like, it's not unknown for the Jedi to be like, well, you don't rule us. We're our own separate entity, and I think they should have done that here. In this case, and what's worse is they actively help at the end, even though they protested, don't kill it, but once it got free, they actively help kill it. Which bothered me because, especially since the episode was really, really implying that this was intelligent. In fact, they did it in a really clunky, cartoonish way when the scientists studying it was like, oh, it could be intelligent, and they had it show up, and like, it was obviously heard Palpatine say kill it and was pissed off about it. And for the rest of the episode, it was obviously purposely hunting after Palpatine specifically because he had said to kill it and that it had a grudge against him. So clearly it was intelligent. Clearly the Jedi should have stepped in to stop him, and they didn't. Instead they killed it. And then at the end of the episode they had the dun-dun-dun cliffhanger where Palpatine says, clone the beast. So, unfortunately, I'm sure this isn't the last we've seen of it. But, yeah, I hated this episode. I was rooting for the beast. Let me put it that way. And I was very upset when it lost. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is called A Death Trap. Now, this one... it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be when I first started watching it, and I saw it was about a group of clone cadets going on a training mission. I'm like, ugh, that's the last thing I want to see. And it reminded me a lot of Ender's Game too. And then there was this one dude with long hair, and they were like, you would call him Lucky, and all the other troopers were bringing shit to him. But he was actually awesome. And it turns out, and I kind of saw this coming, but it turns out that he was Boba Fett. And he's on this mission to kill Mace Windu, and he gets away fairly easily with it. But I will say the episode did get somewhat interesting towards the end once they got into a plot of him trying to kill Mace Windu. And eventually, destroying the entire ship when that assassination attempt failed. So it was okay, I guess, but yeah, not hugely into this episode, but it was alright. But it's just the beginning of a trilogy, so we get into the next episode, R2 Come Home, where Mace Windu and Anakin chase after... They try to find the admiral who was on the ship when it went down and rescue him. And of course, Boba and his team of bounty hunters use this as another chance to try to kill Mace Windu, which they're almost successful in because Windu and Anakin gets trapped under all this rubble. But they send R2-D2 out to send out a message, but R2-D2 gets attacked by the bounty hunters, or first he has to scare them away, but then when he starts flying the ship, they think he's Mace Windu and start chasing after him. I kind of like that. I kind of like R2, to be honest, and I kind of like the storyline and the fact like Mace Windu like hated him at first, like your droid's annoying, blah blah blah, and I don't think your droid's gonna save us. I think he just went off and fucked off, and then we see like R2's like fighting for his life, like trying desperately to save them, and of course in the end he does, which was gratifying to me. So and Mace Windu acknowledges that hey, your droid's actually cool after all. So, yeah, it was a decent episode. I really liked it. Alright, so now we finally come to the finale of Season 2, the third episode in this trilogy that deals with them trying to rescue the Admiral who's still prisoner of these bounty hunters who are trying to use him as bait to draw out Mace Windu, but Mace Windu, of course, is still severely injured, so instead they send out the other Jedi, Plo Koon, or whatever his name is, I don't know. Anyway, he goes out with Ahsoka, and I actually found this a really cool team up as a really interesting. I love this. One thing I do like about the Clone Wars is how they always pair up all these different characters and focus on different characters and pair them up and whatnot. And they had this random Jedi guy we've seen. I think he had like cameos in the prequels, but he appeared a couple times earlier in the show, and you see him go on an adventure with Ahsoka, and of course Boba and whatnot were expecting Mace Windu, and they did, kind of pissed off when he shows up, and they show him tracking them down, and like Ahsoka uses her Jedi abilities to track them down, and once they do, it's a big fight between them and the bounty hunters, and it was intense. So I liked it. I thought this was a really good episode. I thought it was a great way to end the season. So yeah. So those are the episodes of Season 2 of Star Wars The Clone Wars. So now, as always, I will name my favorite and least favorite episode of the season. So first we'll start with what I think is the worst episode of the season and my least favorite episode of the season. And so for me, this came down to 2 episodes. And so the runner-up is The Xylo Beast Strikes Back. I just talked about my issues with that episode, how I actually was rooting for the Beast, and I was kind of pissed me off that the Jedi actually helped kill him. But for the worst episode of the season, I'm definitely going to go with the Bounty Hunters. This episode, to be fair, it's probably because I've seen this recycled so many times and stuff that came out after it and stuff that came out before it. But they just do that Magnificent Seven plot over and over and over and over and over and over again. And as I said, this is probably one of the worst examples of it that I've seen, because it actually doesn't make any sense for the bounty hunters to keep coming, other than the fact that the plot required it, and the fact that they just run away doesn't make any sense either, and the fact that they said, "Ooh, there's 7 of you!" So, that is the worst episode of the season. Now, as for best episode of the season, this is really hard because there's a lot of. I don't think there's any amazing episodes this season, to be fair. But, last season there was only one episode I gave an 8 to. And this season there are several episodes I gave an 8 to. There was the Holocron Heist, or the third episode in that trilogy, Children of the Force, or the Duchess of Mandalore was also very interesting. But I'm going to have to give best episode to The Deserter, because for me that was the biggest character piece of the season, even though the B plot deal with them trying to find Grievous, but I didn't think it was terrible. I thought it was a serviceable B plot that was interesting. But the A plot with Rex, meeting that clone trooper who were deserted and had a family, and I loved the characters of the children. I thought it was great interaction. I thought it was a great character growth story for Rex. So that is, and plus the implications of how the clones are actually unique individuals in their own right. So I did enjoy that. So that was my favorite episode of the season. So, my overall rating for Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 2 out of 10, I'm going to give this A 7, very good. I did think it was an improvement over season 1. As I said, there were more good episodes, and it was less about, win this strategic location for the war, and got more into the character beats, character stories, and whatnot. So, yeah. Very decent season. So that is it for my coverage of Season 2 of Star Wars The Clone Wars. Be sure to check out my channel in approximately 1 month's time when I shall cover Season 3 of The Clone Wars, and every other month as I'll finish covering all episodes of The Clone Wars, one season at a time, once a month. Also, be sure to check out my channel for many more videos and other shows like Star Trek Lower Decks, The Expanse, Better Call Saul, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.